but we are now coming into the third session of our of the first day of our seminar, and I think this morning we started to warm up. We had some very robust discussions on some of the topics presented by our presenters, and I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Roberto Garcia. I work with the Toowoomba Regional Council, and it's actually a big honor to be able to participate and help chair the discussion for our next three presenters. But first of all, I'd just like to again reiterate our thanks to Christoph and William and the staff of the Multifaith Center for organizing this seminar, which is for us in Toowoomba is a big, it's another step towards making Toowoomba as pilot city of peace and harmony. I have actually in my car back a sticker which was provided by Pure Land Learning College. It said, "Smile is the beginning of peace." And actually I put that in the back of my car so that anyone following me will look at it, and then when they come past me, I'll just smile at them. Give them a bit of warning. You gotta smile when you go past me. So that's my little spiel for today. First of all, I'd just like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Actually Consul General, Honorary Consul General Alan Grummitt for the Philippines. And Alan has been working with has been in the consulate for so many years now, but he's also a person who's very busy with his own business. But he is able to juggle it, and the Filipino community in Queensland has actually have really adopted him and his family as members of that community. So his topic today is religion and peace from diplomatic practice and perspectives with a particular reference to the Philippines. Honorary Consul Governor.
Thank you, Robert, and good afternoon, all. It's becoming a bit of a theme to thank the University of Southern Queensland and Robert and what am I talking about? Robert and Christoph and William for arranging such a seminar, for having the initiative to do so. I do have a criticism, however. Nobody asked my permission for Christoph to retire. And I'd suggest there'd be a number of people around this table who would be quite angry about not having been invited.
Here.
To retire. To retire. This nearly didn't happen. If I may introduce, and once it's said that you never start a speech with an apology. So this is not an apology, it's an explanation. At 9 o'clock last Thursday morning, I had a call from our youngest daughter, and she runs our office in the UK in London. She happened to be in Canada at the time. She said, "Dad, how quick can you get to Istanbul for me? Can you be there tomorrow morning?" And I said, well, I need to look at my calendar first. And I knew my calendar said that right now I was to be here in Toowoomba. So that became something of a challenge. But Monday evening I left, last Thursday afternoon I was on a 2 o'clock flight, arrived in Istanbul at 6:30 on Friday morning, worked all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Monday evening I flew back to London. We had meetings about the issue with my daughter. Tuesday I flew from London to Singapore, and then last night arrived finally at home in Brisbane. So you might wonder why I was a little late getting here this morning. That's the explanation. If you see me doze off a little, that's also the explanation. So excuse me for that. Now, you're all aware this is the first session after lunch. And it's the drowsy session. So, you as Q either thinks I'm interesting enough to keep you awake and alert, or doesn't know about the draughty session, or doesn't rate this paper very highly. I'm going to let you judge that. And I have to say at the beginning that I have taken certain liberties with my subject. Those of you who believe that I'm way off the subject as I work through this paper might be pleased to know that I did come back to it toward the end. Now, most of our discussion today has been on religion, but I want to suggest to you that there are more differences than religion in our society. And I'm sure we can all recognise some of those. I'm sure that there are probably very few of us who have commonality in all four of the major issues of culture, politics, religion, or nationality of origin. This morning we concentrated on the religious differences and similarities. This afternoon at the outset I want to broaden that a little to talk a bit about culture, politics, religion and nationality of origin. Culturally, I think we'd all agree that Australia is a lucky country culturally. I've been Consul General now for 18 years, and in all of that time my favourite sermon which I preach, and to all Filipinos, new and old, is that we have two obligations. First one, when we migrate to a new country, such as Australia, we need to be Australian. I think that's vitally important. It's important within the context of multiculturalism. But I also tell them, don't forget or abandon your own culture and your own values. And I think that's the challenge to us all, is to balance those two issues. My view, however, is that in every country, the host country's culture must prevail and be strong. And if I may be provocative, perhaps even dominant. We do not want or need overseas cultures being brought into Australia and bringing with them the belligerent attitudes and ethnic fighting of the home countries. Leave all that at home. And that was touched on earlier this morning. Embrace Australia, the country and the culture of your choosing. Leave your differences back at home. Perhaps dangerously, the next subject I touch is politics. And I suggest to you that again, Australia is the lucky country politically. In many countries, differences are so great that governments last only a few months. We in Australia have generally stable governments which survive for full terms. My major difficulty is that our two major parties seem to move closer and closer together as time passes. Gone are the days when one voted for the left ideologies of the Labor Party or the right-wing conservative policies of the Liberals. Each of the major parties seem to be taking common ground. And while that's a good thing in a way, to me it's a bad thing in another way, in that it's really closer to the American system. So now we vote for people rather than policies. So the minor parties spring up, and the difficulty of that is that almost all of them are single-issue parties, or at least single-focus. So now we have a country run and controlled by a few minor parties. That's democracy. And here in Australia it works reasonably well, though there is often a feeling of the tail wagging the dog. Just to give you an example of what I'm saying, after July, the makeup of our Senate will be as shown there. So whoever wants to pass legislation is going to have the 4 or 5 single-person parties on board supporting them. And I question whether that's a good idea. Coming back now more to the topic, we all know, indeed we heard this morning, that there are very many religions around the world. And as the world gets smaller every year, we all know that many of those religions find themselves together in each country. Not only are there many basic religions, but even within these there are many subgroups. In Christian religions we have the Roman Catholics, the Protestants and others, Muslims, the Shiites, the Sunnis and others. We have Buddhist, Hindu, and I added this morning atheist to that list. And in each of the major groups there are subgroups. And that brings me to the first major point of my presentation, and it's this, and reference was made in a way to these things this morning. If we study the various major religions and each of their subgroups, we find that the basic philosophies are all quite similar. If we study, for example, the Bible and the Quran, we find major similarities with few differences in the basics. What we do see is that across the major subgroups, the major themes of peace and harmony are common. I added this morning words that came: understanding, tolerance, all common themes amongst all of the major religions. In my view, Nelson Mandela has been one of the greatest statesmen of our generation. He was a shocking administrator, in my view, but he was a great statesman. And in a recent interview, the interviewer asked the question, "You were raised a Methodist. Has religion played an important part in your life?" Mandela's reply, I believe, was profound. He answered, "It is important not to be hostile to what a greater part of society has embraced, whether as Christians, Muslims, Hindus. The relation between God is a personal matter and not open to challenge." Nelson Mandela. On a more frivolous note, in Wilbur Smith's latest novel, quotes his hero Hector Cross as believing both Christianity and Islam are studded with priceless diamonds of beauty and truth, and many of these are identical. What then divides us? In my opinion, only one thing: extremism. The word zealous was used this morning by the Bishop. If we study almost any of the recent troubles in the world, we find them to be generated by extremists of otherwise peaceful elements of society. Examples in religion are not hard to find. To name a few, the Roman Catholic and Protestant battles in Ireland not many years ago, the current Muslim battles in Syria, the battles in the Philippines, in Mindanao, between the government forces representing the Christian population and the Muslim extremists in the hills of Mindanao. There are many more. "85% of Filipinos are Roman Catholic. The remaining 15% are Protestants, Muslims and some of the other religions. In the southern island of Mindanao, of the 15% of the population who are Muslims, only about 15% of them are extremists. That is 2% of the population. Yet that very small minority can hold a community in terror, and did so for years. Just as an aside, I had to go to Mindanao a few years ago to meet a fellow who was the local mayor, I thought, again, Oro City. And it was election time. So I was met at the airport by a fellow holding my name up on a piece of board, put my bag in the car, and off we drove. And this was at the time of strong activity in the hills. So we drove into the city, and to my surprise I didn't see one election sign with my friend's name on it. Not one. To my even greater surprise, the driver went straight through the city and headed up into the hills where all the discontent was. And I was thinking, now, it would have been very difficult for this driver to biff my real driver on the head, pinch the piece of paper, and kidnap me, which is the big thing. It's how they get their money. So as we got further and further into the hills, I got further and more nervous, and started to think at the next checkpoint, I'm out of here. I'm jumping out and I'll throw myself on the mercy of the soldiers at the checkpoint. And was about to do exactly that when I saw the first election sign of my colleague. And I began to realise that he wasn't the mayor of Kagangaro City, but he was the mayor of one of the cities up in the hills. So I was there safe and sound, but it was a very, very worrying couple of hours. So extremism is our enemy. But there is hope. And I'll tell you by example what I'm talking about. In years gone by, one regularly heard of the extreme uprising of the Mindanao Muslims and the atrocities they carried out. These days, you may have noticed that very few reports of such behaviour, because the Philippine central government and the local governments have engaged the terrorists in dialogue and have established working relationships with meaningful negotiations. Today, while one could not claim with any certainty that these problems are solved, it is certainly clear that relationships are much better. With continuing dialogue, let us trust that the tension and turmoil will continue to reduce into the future. Let us also hope that continued dialogue here in Australia can keep us free of the extremism evident in other communities and in other countries. So, returning to the topic of our discussion, peace, interreligious dialogue and culture, and to my subtopic, religion and peace from diplomatic practice. I've given you one real example out of the rebels in Mindanao of how diplomatic practice can lead to peace through interreligious dialogue. In Mindanao, it is working. If we continue to talk here in good faith, and we continue to isolate the extremists, then we have hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Consul Grummitt. The next speaker will be Dr. Marcus Harms, who will be talking about the Anglican Church and ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. Dr. Marcus Harms.
Thank you, everybody. And just to my slides. Well, I'd like to express my thanks to the organisers of this event for the invitation to speak to this topic, and I also start by pointing out that I'm not in any way to be thought of as a spokesperson for the Anglican Church or in any way officially connected with it. What I'm offering you are some reflections based on personal observation and academic study. So, the Anglican Church, meaning a worldwide communion connected by history to England and to a mother church, the Church of England, has a long ecumenical history. The creation of an entity that we recognise as distinctively Anglican or English is itself the consequence of 16th century European-wide theological speculation, and this meant that English clergymen, and they were all men incidentally, were reading and supporting the ideas of European scholars from Germany and Switzerland. In the 17th century, English clergy participated in the Synod of Dort, a major European gathering of Reformed clergy. From this time, the English people were also emerging as a colonial power, and by the 19th century, English clergymen, still men, were an inevitable concomitant of military and mercantile colonial expansion, bringing Anglicanism to a wider world. Williams like this. So, here we have the Anglican Communion as it exists today. I mentioned the British Empire. If you can imagine what a map of the world looked like in the 19th century, and the bits of it that were pink, the bits that were the British colonial territories, the bits that are blue are a very clear parallel for that. What we have is a communion which is mostly, but not exclusively, a legacy of British colonial expansion. Next slide, please. An Anglican minister, the Reverend Johnson, accompanied the First Fleet to Botany Bay, and this was a pattern repeated elsewhere in what became the territories of the Empire. That empire has now long receded, but the Anglican Church is one aspect of that imperialism that has been left behind, along with the infrastructure of that church. Next slide, please. We find, therefore, that incongruous-looking English cathedrals, so quintessentially English and so alien and out of place, survive in most cities of the former empire. This is actually the Anglican Cathedral in Shanghai. Next one, please, is actually a cathedral in Pakistan, the Cathedral of the Resurrection. Quintessentially English, but somehow out of place. Next slide, please. St Andrews in Singapore. Again, it looks like it's just dropped out of the sky from the English countryside, as does my next slide, please, which is the cathedral in Jerusalem. And here in Australia, we have our own 19th century Gothic edifices. But I should stress that the empire did not just leave behind the buildings, but also the worshippers to occupy them. And today there are Anglicans throughout the Americas, Australasia, Africa and Europe, numbering between 70 to 80 million people, depending on who does the counting and how you do the count. The Church of England, as established by the English Parliament in the 16th century, was intended as a national church, to be confined within the borders of the English realm, therefore not to expand and not to interact with overseas entities. The international expansion of that church, as a concomitant of British colonial expansion, was not at all envisaged by 16th century reformers. As a consequence, there is not, and there never has been, anything like an Anglican Pope, and there has been limited provision for governing an international communion. No single person controls the Anglican communion at an international level. In fact, it gives quite the reverse impression. And this communion comprises a number of autonomous provinces. There is, of course, a spiritual figurehead, the Archbishop of Canterbury, but he is a spiritual figurehead. He has no jurisdictional control over, for instance, the Anglican Church of Australia than with any other foreign bishop. There are, of course, a number of commissions and agencies as well that represent the Anglican Church in ecumenical dialogue. There's a network for interfaith concerns, which promotes relations between Christians and peoples of other faiths, and a standing commission on ecumenical relations, and an Anglican office at the United Nations, all of which give the communion a voice to participate in international dialogue. But there's no focal point. In some respects, this lack of central control can and has limited ecumenical dialogue and interreligious dialogue. There's not a single voice of authority which can represent the entire communion, besides the very nebulous spiritual authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury. But in parts of the communion, parts of that world map I showed you, Anglicanism is a major aspect of life, for instance seen in the massive and unprecedented numerical expansion of the Church in places such as the Sudan, Nigeria, Rwanda and Uganda. This does mean, of course, that what we might recognise as interreligious dialogue has actually more been proselytising and converting. But even in places where the Anglican Church is, in terms of demographics or numbers, a very small presence, the ecumenical impact of the Church can be significant. A case in point is St George's College in Jerusalem, a centre obviously at the flashpoint of some of the most troubling controversies and battles currently known in the world, which is at least a little moment of calm for interfaith dialogue and study. The Anglican Bishop of Egypt and North Africa, Munir Anis, contributed to peace talks following the 2011 Egyptian revolution, and could I have my next slide please, and hosted dialogue on national unity in Egypt, as well as promoting the so-called priest-imam exchange, which aims for communities to swap their priests and their imams around for a little while to encourage understanding between Muslim religious leaders and Christian clergy. And it is a response, an Anglican ecumenical response to sectarian violence. So those are just a few instances of a church engaged in outreach, but I want to move now from examples to a broader pattern. Over the 20th century, Anglican ecumenical dialogue has typically moved in three directions: towards Protestant churches, towards the Orthodox Church, and towards the Roman Catholic Church. And the last of these has been the most fraught. The 16th century Reformation were, after all, acts of protest against the papacy, not the foundation for a harmonious relationship. And from the 16th until at least the 19th century, there was little between the churches of England and Rome except mutual hostility. Relations with Protestant churches were typically more straightforward. Anglican ecumenical relations with Protestant churches are long-standing, if you think back to my comments about the Synod of Dort, even if they have not always been successful themselves. For instance, in the middle of the 19th century, there were plans to establish a joint Anglican-Lutheran bishopric in Jerusalem, with the bishop incumbent to alternate between a Lutheran and an Anglican. And the idea came to nothing. It proved far too complex to achieve, and now it's just an Anglican bishopric. There was, as well, abortive attempts at union between the Church of England and the Methodist Church of Great Britain, again which came to nothing. It was rejected by the Church of England in 1972. But other ecumenical gestures have yielded more tangible results. In some instances, there have been successful links made, and Anglican churches have entered into full communion with other faith communities, such as the Maratoma Syrian Church, the Porvoo Communion, meaning the Episcopal churches in Portugal and Spain, and Lutheran churches in Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Estonia and Lithuania, and the churches of North and South India, the Church of Bangladesh and the Church of Pakistan, all uniting churches. The Anglican Church of Canada, meanwhile, is in full communion with the Evangelical Lutheran Church. What this full communion means is that the churches connected in this way recognise the validity of each other's orders and sacraments. The different Anglican provinces are also, of course, members of the World Council of Churches, and Anglican archbishops have served as presidents of this major body for ecumenical dialogue. So that's an impression of at least some success, if by success we mean developing links, formalising links and encouraging understanding. By contrast, an enduring stumbling block towards unity that prevails between the Catholic and Anglican and Orthodox and Anglican churches is that the Catholic and Orthodox churches do not recognise the validity of Anglican orders. In 1896, the papal bull Apostolicae Curiae declared them to be, in famous words, absolutely null and utterly void. A statement re-endorsed in 1998 by Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who we now know as Pope Benedict. The Orthodox Church, for its part, considers Anglican clergy to be laity, and if clergy convert, they must be reordained. Regardless of the rightness or wrongness of these positions in sacramental terms, they have resulted in years of ill will and acrimony from all sides. However, the formal statements that have emphasised and even at times reinforced difference and mutual ill will have been balanced by more constructive efforts. At the very least, the importance of dialogue between churches has been made manifest in tangible terms by the actions of church leaders. In the 1960s, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, travelled to Rome to meet Pope John XXIII, who we've heard quite a bit about already today. The importance of this meeting lies in the fact that it was the first time an Archbishop of Canterbury and a Pope had come face to face since the late Middle Ages. On this occasion, the Vatican authorities permitted no photographs to be taken and would only address the Archbishop as Dr. Fisher, as to do otherwise could have been construed as recognising his orders. But still, these aspects of the meeting suggest that it was groundbreaking, if tentative. Could I have my next slide, please? By the late 1960s, relations had thawed to an extent, and the next Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Michael Ramsey, travelled to Rome and met Paul VI. On this occasion, the meeting was public. Ramsay was acknowledged as an archbishop, and these are significant steps forward from the last meeting. Since then, high-level dialogue has been a feature of interaction between the leaders of the Anglican and Catholic churches. Pope John Paul II visited Canterbury Cathedral, the mother church of the Anglican Communion, in 1982, and as recently as 2010, Pope Benedict XVI attended Evensong in Westminster Abbey, which I suspect was a great lover of classical music. People have vastly appreciated. Anglican and Catholic dialogue is formalised and encouraged by initiatives such as the foundation of the Anglican Centre in Rome, which has been going since 1966. But to move really to my final point, one of the greatest ironies of recent religious developments involving the Anglican Church is that the Anglican Communion now finds itself in a position of ecumenical dialogue with itself. As I've said, the Anglican Communion is decentralised. It has no pope, no curia, no central bank. It certainly has organs of communication, including, could I have my next slide please, the 10 yearly conferences of Anglican bishops, the Lambeth conferences. But it has no focal point beyond the historical linkage to Canterbury. In some respects, this can serve the Church well in terms of ecumenical outreach. It leaves the international communion fairly supple, and means that local churches can respond to local demands. Examples are, for instance, those of the Anglican Church of Canada and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Canada, and the forming of the Uniting Churches on the subcontinent. But against this flexibility has to be posed the question, how flexible can an institution be before it snaps entirely, both internally and in relations with other churches? Some changes in Anglicanism have critically impaired, for the time being at least, ecumenical relations, especially between Anglican, Catholic and Anglican Orthodox churches. And one of the most notable has been the decision of some Anglican dioceses to ordain women to the priesthood. This is not universal across the international communion, nor even within particular countries. And here in Australia, the largest and richest Anglican diocese, Sydney, does not have female priests. But the decision to ordain women has been widely pinpointed by Anglican and Catholic commentators as a major stumbling block to further unity. In recent years, the Anglican Church has gone further and has consecrated women to the episcopate, which is a leadership position within the Church. This is, again, not universal, and in Australia there's only a handful of female bishops, but it has again been met in some quarters with dismay as a clear sign that unity would be impossible. But if this ordination to the priesthood of women has created hurdles for ecumenical relations between the Anglican and Roman Catholic churches, it's also prompted a crisis in the Anglican communion itself. Far from being in a position to engage in ecumenical dialogue with other churches or other faiths, there's actually now a need for dialogue within the church itself to try and preserve unity. The Anglican communion is presently, and some would say irrevocably, split in both geographic and theological terms. The ordination of women is not the only issue that divides. Some liberal or progressive churches, including the Episcopal Church in the USA and the Anglican Church of Canada, ordain homosexual clergy and bless same-sex unions. Some pursue non-literal patterns of scriptural interpretation. These actions and others have prompted the breakdown of whatever fragile unity existed in the Anglican communion. Many American Episcopalians have split from their church. Rival dioceses and sometimes entire national churches have sprung up. Some disaffected and more conservative Anglicans have sought institutional sanctuary with the church in Africa. And the church in Africa has in turn strongly condemned the more liberal tendencies of the Western churches. There are other signs of discord. Many bishops from Africa and from Sydney boycott the Lambeth meetings and instead have their own rival system. I would say it's fair to observe that for at least a decade now, the Anglican Church has turned in on itself to a large extent as leaders attempt to mediate among themselves, to resolve differences and mediate their way through crises in unity, without any particular sign of resolution. There are, at least though, some heartening signs of cooperation. The two rival Anglican churches in Pittsburgh have at least agreed to share the cathedral. The recent crises in the Anglican Church have impaired some of its ecumenical relations, especially with Catholicism. Before his recent retirement, Pope Benedict XVI established the so-called ordinariate, meaning a structure within the Catholic Church which would retain some liturgical and other structures of Anglicanism for Anglican clergy who joined it. It was not so much the creation of this ordinariate, but the way it was announced that caused harm to relations. As is now widely known, the timing of the announcement came as a surprise to the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and Rowan Williams in turn protested what he viewed as unnecessary secrecy, a diplomatic spat, essentially, that did for a time set back relations. So to finish, some of these points probably sound very negative, but then I think it would be unreasonable to regard peace or intercultural or interfaith dialogue as a walk in the park or a bed of roses when instead it's a bed of thorns. But I would hope this should not be seen as the totality of the picture. On many levels, relations between the Anglican Church and other churches are very warm, from cooperation between local clergy of different denominations to the friendships between archbishops at the highest level. There's a strong precedent for that in Queensland, as is widely known. The Catholic and Anglican archbishops in Brisbane in the 60s were very dear friends, an unusual time, in fact, for a cross-sectarian friendship. Here in Queensland still, there are enduring signs of ecumenical achievements, including the commitment of Anglican, Catholic, Lutheran and uniting clergy to support each other's ministries in remote and regional areas. At a broader level, the Anglican Church's enterprise and ecumenical enterprise has been of immense importance, and I think an obvious instance of this is the leadership of the Anglican superstar, Desmond Tutu, in heading the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa and heading the South African Council of Churches. But while there may be ties that bind, there is much that leaves the Anglican Church distant from other faith communities. The divisions within the communion itself suggest that at present there could be more that separates than unites. But there are also, if we look hard enough, instances of decentralized, often functional activity, an institution that against the odds does actually sometimes hang together rather than hang separately, and that is almost inspirational in the context of 21st century global politics. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marcus Harms. I think we're doing a bit of good time here. Hopefully, our next speaker will be Mr. Ivan Reichelt, as the chaplain coordinator of USQ Multifaith Center. And his topic is Interreligious Dialogue in Practice of Modern Multifaith Chaplaincy in a Regional University.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to talk. I'd like to thank also the Multicultural Centre, Multifaith Centre and the Multicultural Centre work very closely together at USQ. They have recognised that culture and faith are very closely related. So we owe a lot, Multifaith owes a lot to the Multicultural Centre. I'm also thankful for this lectern to stand behind, because I remember giving a talk once and I was halfway through my talk and I looked down, whoops, there was a wardrobe malfunction. So I like the comfort of a podium. Interreligious dialogue, also refers to as interfaith dialogue, is not just words or talk, it includes human interaction and relationships. Dialogue, therefore, is not just something that takes place on an official or academic level only. It can take place between individuals, institutions, and on common levels, community levels. For example, between neighbours, in schools, universities, and places of work. It can take place between both formal and informal settings. It is both about people of different faiths coming to a mutual understanding and respect that allows them to live and cooperate with each other in spite of their differences. The term refers to cooperative and positive interaction between people of different religious traditions, each party remaining true to their own beliefs while respecting the right of the others to practice their faith freely. The religious conversations that one might encounter with a theologian or an academic would be based on a scriptural knowledge and a sound grip of historical religious understanding. Historically, most religions have tended to view other religions in terms of incorrect beliefs or practices, theological errors, heresies, blasphemy, apostasy, and inequality. This is derived from the belief, especially among the monotheistic religions, that one's own tradition possesses the one and true faith. But religious dialogue may not always be based on theology or religious or history, like the Crusades or the European Christian colonisation, or the aftermath of 7/11, or 9/11. 7/11, yeah. As a multi-faith chaplain, we deal with people from various walks of life and faith traditions. Demographics, upbringing and environment play a large part in the perceptions that are held by people when looking at the subject of religion or faith. Interfaith dialogue is only possible when two parties are willing to listen and respect the other's right to have their belief. Some of the problems that we encounter when engaging in this type of dialogue on campus is when people insist that they have the true religion and insult the other person by insinuating that their religion is based on lies and untruths. There is very little grounds for dialogue when a statement is made that the holy book you hold to be the Word of God has been changed and is not to be relied upon. I'd like to quote from a reading from Rabbi Eric Yoffe, who served as president of the Union of Reformed Judaism. He is very well known in his work of dialogue between Christianity, Islam and Judaism. I found his comments to be very honest and refreshing, if not a bit confronting, as he talks about this experience with religious dialogue. And I read, I have been participating in interfaith dialogue as a rabbi and Jewish leader for more than 30 years, and most of the time, it just doesn't work. Most of the time, and it is painful for me to admit this, it is terribly boring. Most of the time, there is a tendency to manufacture consensus, whether it exists or not. Most of the time, we go to great lengths to avoid conflict. Most of the time, we cover the same ground that we covered last month or the month before. And far too often, we finish our sessions without really knowing the person across the table and what makes them tick religiously. And most of the time, we are satisfied with mouthing a few noble, often repeated sentiments. Thus, we affirm that importance of mutual understanding, tolerance and dialogue. We assert that all human beings are created in the image of God. We proclaim that despite our differences, all of our traditions preach love and humanity and service to humanity. Nothing is wrong with these statements, these sentiments. Of course, in conceptual terms, I believe in them all. But if we don't dig beneath the surface and focus on substance rather than rhetoric, they mean very little. The result is most of the time, interfaith discussions are simply excruciatingly irrelevant to me and to the world around me. So he asked then the question, why then have I been so involved for so many years? And the reason is that very occasionally something extraordinary happens. One of these conversations changes me, binds me to my colleagues, advances my understanding of myself and others, and adds texture and depth to my own religious beliefs and convictions. Interreligious dialogue has been talked about for many years, and there have been many books and articles written on the subject. But interreligious dialogue on a personal level is still a relatively new concept in the sense of personal communication and understanding. The many books written on the subject of interfaith dialogue, which are indeed very good in their own right, fail to look at the real aspects of personal connection and people's perceptions. Religion is a subject that most Australians stay well clear of and avoid even the most basic of religious discussions. It seems that the best way I know of to end a conversation or to clear a room is simply by telling the person I'm communicating with that I work at the university as a multifaith chaplain. Within seconds I find myself alone again. It is unfortunate that religion has such a negative attitude attached to it in this country. This reluctance for some people to talk to others about their faith can hinder any form of dialogue. Dialogue indeed becomes difficult when the emotive subject matter comes from a built-in perception generated from experiential encounters or a fear of being challenged by a subject that they know very little about. Yet, paradoxically, we are finding that the generations of today are much more spiritually aware and are aware of what is important in the world. The awareness of political and ethical problems they face in day-to-day life is now what religion is called upon to either fix, agree with, or butt out of. People are generally motivated and guided by their perceptions of what they think is the truth. We have all heard of the statement that perception is reality. Whatever people perceive to be the truth to them, no matter how illogical or irrational you think they are, to them it is truth. This is no less true of the university student when talking about religion. That is, the ones who haven't dashed off as soon as they find out that you're a chaplain. It is these perceptions that have attached religious and especially Christianity and has brought dialogue into a postmodern paradigm of moralistic grounds and styles and lifestyles. Religiosity is then based on an emotive subject and can incur immediate dissension and promote judgmental ideology. The question of abortion, euthanasia, gay marriage, etc. are usually the first lines of attack when the topic of religion is introduced. Often it is at this level that people will assume their perspective of religion and indeed of God. The story is told about a school teacher who asked the class to draw anything they wanted. One drew a horse, one child drew parents and his siblings, while another drew a spaceship. He asked this one little boy what he was going to draw, and the boy said that he was going to draw God. The teacher said, "You can't draw God." The little boy asked, "Why not?" And the teacher replied, "No one knows what God looks like." The little boy answered, "That's because I haven't drawn him yet." When people draw their own individual pictures of God, they can arrogantly think that everyone should agree with their perception of God and their faith. The university chaplain hears some strange versions of theology and indeed some strange versions of Christianity. True dialogue dictates that we must resist the temptation of trying to put them right and put everything straight on their theology, even if that theology is diametrically opposed to ours. Sometimes it is those differences that can make us think about our faith and our belief system. I would like to use a quote from an article we received from a Tertiary Chaplain Ministers Association conference I attended in Newcastle last year, written by Dr. Eric von Diers, Research Ethics of Burdock University. Religion has a singular effort in it, has the singular effort of dividing people, yet its aim is the exact opposite. It's meant to give direction to the lost soul, yet it throws many people into confusion. The experience of faith is intended to provide comfort, yet the mere mention of it arouses the deepest suspicions of the spiritual alienated. The very same thing could be said about love, but we would not, on that account, give away a possibility of love. Religion has always been tested and found wanting, which is why it has never stood still, but has stood a hotbed of controversy, innovations and striving like ever, every other aspect of human endeavour. And yet the last 30 years of religious innovation have witnessed a distinct preference for the inward, self-focused spiritual awakening associated with the mystics of the social, constructive and political directed expression of the Church. The major barrier that we find as chaplains is to get students and staff to want to commit to this type of dialogue and to get them to sit down long enough to have a relationship with them. Students are here to study their respective subjects and don't feel that they have any time, even if they do have the desire for these kinds of dialogues and relationships. The prospects of providing religious studies as a major or as a prerequisite to relative courses would be a positive step in the direction of educating students about other religions and promoting religious dialogue. I like to quote from Dr. Christoph Bartorowitz, and he wrote in his article dealing with religious diversity at university, he says, "Knowledge of religious systems and understanding of different faiths is not only a matter of interest for the university chaplaincy. In addition to formal courses of religion or with religious component provided by university, educational programs about religious issues should be delivered on campus to increase knowledge about religion and make students and staff sensitive to the knowledgeable and be knowledgeable about religion and different religions' needs and observances. This will help to avoid some stereotypes and increase respect for others, as well as religious sensitivity. It should also assist in minimising possible conflict, tension or discrimination based on religion." Our long-term vision in the chaplaincy is to promote and facilitate dialogue sessions on campus by having different cultures and religious groups, including Aboriginal cultures, interacting with each other directly, forming relationships, understanding each other's religious festivals and cultures. We can never tell when wars and hatred of other countries can fester here in Australia, Toowoomba, or indeed at USQ, and when tensions between people reach breaking point. Dialogue then becomes something that is tangible and accessible to the students and staff at USQ. It is a preventative measure, and we pray that it will never be needed to that extent, but it would be gratifying to know that it was here. The very essence of chaplaincy is relationships. We call it pastoral care. Forming a relationship with the person opposite you in your office, the coffee shop, or around the campus. This is also the very essence of interfaith dialogue, as we know it. And this is how information is learnt and shared. We have been involved in practical ways also, when we have had the privilege of joining with our Muslim brothers and sisters in the celebration of the end of Ramadan. And we've been invited to the opening of the new mosque. We have joined in the Buddhists in forums, social events and talks, and have enjoyed wonderful meals, even if they are vegetarian. They have provided for us. I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in a Saraswati Puja festival. Pretty hard to say. That means a prayer for the Hindu goddess of knowledge. That was last week. It was a wonderful experience and a start in building a relationship with those from the Hindu faith. Our multifaith centre have a lot of different religions. We have Buddhists, we have Baha'i, we have Hindus, we have probably 4 or 5 different denominations of Christians, including Sudanese, Chinese, Catholic, and yeah, so there's a whole, and other Protestant religions as well. As Rabbi Yoffe stated, all this dialogue is essential, even if we are going over the same ground. We must open up our minds to what we can learn, not just what we can teach. But in order to find the truth, we must always go back to our point of reference, to our holy books, and listen to the wisdom of those who have gone before us to learn the truth. We must learn the wisdom of the past so that we can anticipate the future in order to live in the present. A little quote from Bill Kern is, "Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, today is a gift of God, which is why it is called the present." Another quote from Sandy Falls in an article entitled, "What is about religious dialogue?" She says, "Finally, since peace is the goal of interreligious dialogue, the process must be peaceful. It is important to realise that peace is not easily achieved and maintained. The process may be peaceful, but it is sometimes somewhat like climbing Mount Everest. Peace does not occur in a day, and therefore there are obstacles as intrepid travellers struggle up the path to heights where the human spirit may soar. Below we have two quotations and highlight one from highlight the urgency and the need for Muslims and Christians, and indeed all religions, to cooperate. The first is taken from an address from Pope Benedict XVI to ambassadors from Muslim countries in 2006, in which he said, "Interreligious and intercultural dialogue between Christians and Muslims cannot be reduced to an optional extra. It is in fact a vital necessity on which all large measures of our future depend." And the other quote is signed by 137 Muslim scholars and leaders from around the Muslim world and sent to the Christian leaders in 2007. It says, "Muslims and Christians together make up half the world's population. Without peace and justice between those two religious communities, there can never be a meaningful peace in the world. The future of the world depends on the peace between Muslims and Christians." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evan. I think we now come into just make sure that we appreciate the different topics presented, the last three topics, coming from Honorary Consul Grummitt regards the diplomatic practice and in particular reference to the Philippines, and a good historical background on the Anglican Church by Dr. Marcus Harms, and a good on-the-ground experience of Mr. Reichelt in his program along multifaith chaplaincy at USQ. And I'd just like to open the table now for any questions with regards to these presentations today.
Thank you, Doctor. I've enjoyed listening to your historical paper, but it seemed to me to have a very Reformationist interpretation of events which occurred under King Henry VIII. Perhaps if you're looking at things later into the Tudor reign, rather than seeing Anglicanism as an English church, as the Church of England. I thought perhaps you were emphasising the Anglican Church more in the Reformationist tradition. Is that the essence of your problem?
My problem?
The problem of the arguments. But I'm not criticising arguments, but isn't this a situation today where you're trying to have unity?
I see.
Unity with the Protestant tradition, but historically, on one view of it, it's a division in the English-speaking world of the Catholic Church between Rome and England at the time, which wasn't necessarily Reformationist in its character. So I'm only wondering, is the problem that we're now facing, where you've got all these different Anglican communions, all with their own individual opinions? Well, that's a lot more like something in the Protestant tradition than in what some historians might see as a split between Rome and Canterbury, which is on quite different lines to the classical Reformation arguments at the time of Henry VIII. I just interested in your comments. I'm not criticising you.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Your comments.
I guess what I would say, if you bring it back to the Reformation, is I look at the Anglican Church as having time bombs embedded in it, in that there was parliamentary legislation of 1544 that made it clear that there were two provinces in the realm of England, and that was it. And that does not leave scope for organising the international communion, which happened in a very haphazard and unplanned way. So I don't know if that answers your question necessarily, but that's what I would bring back to the idea of Reformation.
Which one? Okay. Marcus, so it's interesting. I came from Sydney before I came up to Toowoomba, and the question of Anglicanism in in Sydney and Anglicanism in Queensland, almost like you're on two different planets. The question of the ecumenical dialogue which was taking place in the early 70s was a very practical thing. I found as a young priest in Sydney there, and we did think, but as time went by, there was much, the Anglican Church in Sydney, I don't want to go down this path really, but there was sort of a separation, to think a Catholic bishop would be allowed to even celebrate a wedding in an Anglican establishment within Parramatta, for instance. The Anglican bishop said there's no way. However, in this place where we are, the relationship between Catholics and Anglicans is very strong, but not only strong, it's in relation to, there's a covenant which was created between the Anglican Diocese of Brisbane, Archdiocese, which the Anglican Diocese comes across here too, and then it comes across two jurisdictions for there. It's the Catholic Diocese, Archdiocese of Brisbane, and also the Catholic Diocese of Toowoomba. And there's a signed off agreement. When was that first done, Bishop Bill?
It was done back in the 90s.
In the 90s it was done, and it's been redone, and it's...
How did Richard Choosman describe it?
Well, it was the one between the three of us.
Yes.
That was done back in Frank Rush's time.
Yeah, okay.
We were talking about that nice relationship between very friendly with Frank Rush and who was there? I forget the name of the bishop. Brian, can we go to the Anglican bishop?
Bishop Hollingworth.
Yeah, but that was then
Or Grimrod.
Grimrod, wasn't
Grimrod. So that's that one. But then we had one as a local diocese and the northern aspect, or what we call the southern aspect of the Anglican diocese, which is one that one. Yeah.
But the main one now, last year, was signed off between Archbishop Aspinall, Archbishop Coleridge and myself.
Yeah.
Took in the whole area there. There's some very practical things there that they endeavour to work together, and it's I think an example of ecumenism, respecting differences, but really trying to work where we can together. And also Queensland churches together, and the Toowoomba churches together is an aspect for that too, the ecumenical side of things.
Yeah, I think it's cooperation, certainly. Did I interrupt? No comment. Certainly cooperation. It was just interesting, prefaced it with a comparison to Sydney, which I think is a diocese that's been on a very interesting journey over the last few decades. But I mean, it has always been very characteristic of the diocese, I think, that draws inspiration from Church of Edward VI rather than being the first. And that's a very distinctive quality.
Wasn't the Reverend Johnson was considered by his opponents to be a Methodist at heart?
He was a very controversial figure. Bishop Dalton, again, was too high church in the parlance at the time.
Reverend, anything here that you were saying something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's following on what the Bishop was saying, my feeling is, I'm involved in ecumenical things, but is that the ecumenical journey of churches has helped some Christians, at least, to learn what you might call a kind of grammar of relationships with people who are different. So within ourselves, and I think you did very well. I think you're a little bit harsh on the Anglican Church, because I think that's one thing that the Anglican Church has, because we have lived from the beginning with difference of whether we're Catholic or Reformed and all the other stuff, and then we've had to work out how we live in different cultures and all the rest of the stuff. We can get in a mess, but on a negative sense. But it also means we can live with messiness. And I actually think that's an important aspect of any dialogue with...
Well, indeed, and I ended up by making that point at the end of my presentation.
But I think as well I would apply to interreligious things is that lessons that Christians have learned from ecumenism are things that we do apply to religious things. Part of it's actually living with messiness that for Anglicans, I think ultimately, we're keen on unity, but ultimately truth and freedom and compassion are more important in their cultural expression than adherence to being a particular form of unity.
Or discipline.
And that's something I think we have to work at interreligiously, is how we can live with all those differences. Yes, but we can't be completely one, I think.
Oh, no.
The question I had, and this is not made for Alan particularly, but for the other two of you, was about extremism. Is what breeds extremism? What is it that gives rise to extremism? Maybe if we can stress that, then we can minimise that.
Well, you would answer that. It would be a world genius.
Yes, well, that's right.
Try ignorance.
Well, ignorance would be one thing.
Yes.
Poverty, I would say, in some places, or this and abuse of power, or false perceptions. I'm thinking from you mentioned Ireland. I grew up in a time of the Troubles. My grandfather lived in Belfast, and he was a cradle Catholic, which he didn't let on to his rabid Ulster Protestant second wife, and so I guess that's been part of my background. And a lot of that was there were genuine issues of power and imbalance of power and poverty in parts of especially rural Ireland, but they were also distorted by ignorance, by certain groups that use those things in ways that were unhelpful. So it is quite to address extremism. It seems to me, or fundamentalism, we have to look at a whole cocktail of things that come together.
I better keep you away from Wendy Liv, grandfather was an orange man. Great grandfather was an orange man.
Dr.
I think this is a very good question, the extremism, and the ambassador for the Consul actually finished his talk with isolate the extremists. I sort of disagree with this, because if you do isolate and disconnect, don't engage, what that's going to leave it to us? They are going to be leave up to them to do whatever they want to do, and they are not going to do anything good for the community. They are going to be more extreme. Recent example of engaging with Taliban and Pakistani Taliban with the Pakistani government, I think is a sort of good development. If they can sit together and sort out the issues and problems, that's not a bad idea. Now, extremism, in this the last century and this century, one of the main reasons of extremism is occupation. Think about the Tamil problems in Sri Lanka. Think about the Palestinian issue. Think about the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, occupation. Now, the things that we are experiencing now, coming from that part of the world, it started from the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, occupation. And then Palestinian occupation, some people think it's the occupation of Jews by of Muslims by the Christian. Actually, Palestinians are Muslims and Christian and Jews. Less number of Jews, but more Christian and Muslims. One of the big fighters of PLO, George Habash, is a Christian. And there are many. I mean, Hanan Ashrawi is a Christian, well-known Palestinian activist. So its occupation and long-term occupation has given the breeding ground for extremism. And unfortunately, the world community has failed to address this issue adequately. If that issue, the Palestinian issue, is solved, I think 90% of the conflict with the Muslims, whatever the other side is, would be solved. And I think, for unknown reasons, leaders are not paying enough attention to that part of the world. And this is equally important for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And if negotiation can work in southern Philippines, if it can work in other places, Kosovo, for example, and Bosnia, for example, negotiation did work, and they come up with some kind of peace. If the world community is serious and sincere, it should work in Palestine as well, and that would be a great help. Now, with respect to what Evan said, I'm part of that little bit of a smaller part of that activities as well. I think in Toowoomba it's not unique. Chaplaincy is a concept Australia-wide and overseas as well. And it's not only in university. These days there is applied as counseling in the schools and in the hospitals and places where they need it. I think there is a demand. There is a necessity. That's why it is here. If there is no demand, no necessity, it won't be here. University would not allow us a space, if there is no need for it. And the activities of the chaplains and the chaplaincy and multifaith center, drop-in center, and so on, has proved that it is capable of delivering the need of the time that the students and the staff and the community desire. And we not only just work within the university, we also liaison with outside the community, outside the university, wider community. And that's also given us the advantage that we are not only helping the student community and staff here, but also we are sort of engaging. And when the wider community see that Muslim, Christian, Buddhist and Hindus and everybody together here, this is a message that goes from the university that also well received in the wider community. That they can see the educated people, the university is in general educated people, center of learning. And if they can work together, wider community should get a positive message. I think this is an excellent example of how we can work together. And again, the thanks goes to Christoph and William, who actually started not only the multifaith center, but the multifaith activities was going before the center was even established. So, that's my experience in Toowoomba. Thank you.
Yeah, right. And Ivan, I think you have in your chaplaincy about six active chaplains now from different faiths. Is that right? And
we do. We have Venerable Wu Ping as Buddhist chaplain. We have Shah Jahan, the Muslim chaplain. We have a chaplain representing the Australian Christian churches or the Pentecostals. I'm Lutheran. And then we have a Catholic priest as well as a Salvation Army officer. So we've got varied denominations and varied, religions.
Springfield,
yeah.
Springfield.
So we.
All right. Yes.
Professor, I think you're guilty of oversimplification. You said occupation is the reason for extremism. I would accept that occupation is one reason for extremism. But the Catholics in Ireland and the Protestants in Ireland didn't have an occupational problem. The Sunnis and the Shiites in Syria don't have an occupational problem. Certainly the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims in Palestine do, as do others. So I think you oversimplify it a bit. But I think that the hope for the world is models like this one in Toowoomba. Wendy and I are getting on a bit now, and we've seen a fair bit of life. And 50 years ago, we would never have been sitting around a table like this with such a diverse group. Never. We didn't talk to each other. Now, here is an example here in Toowoomba that the world could learn from. And if a lot of these extremist groups could sit down and talk together, which is what I used as my example with the Muslims in Mindanao, the solution was sitting down and talking together. And that's what it's all about.
On that one, sir, may I put back a bit more? Yes, I totally agree with you that it's wonderful that we all sitting down and talking about that. But who are we? Intellectually. Now my question is, how are we going to penetrate our understanding? How are we going to penetrate further down from this level to the operational level where people every day interpret the religion meaning and apply it to their daily activities?
I think the answer to that is one word, and it's leadership. That's what we are. We're leaders in our community. And unless we can filter that down to the communities or up, depending on your perspective, then it gets nowhere, it goes nowhere. But it is happening. That's the encouraging thing, it's happening. And hopefully in 50 more years' time, there won't even be a need for such a conference.
So you're thinking of the time frame of 50 years?
We're not going to fix the world tomorrow.
No.
It's a long process. It's a long process. It's a long process. Look, when we're going to go to that invitation on 4th of March, I'm not going alone. This 5th of March is an invitation from the Catholic community, Christians for their Shop Tuesday. Yeah, church. I'm 20, 30 Muslims, as we did in the previous years. When they come to us, come in a group. So these people go within the community back, and they spread the word that we're going to this gathering. And,
Exactly right.
and then people get, they're not our enemies. If they're enemies, we won't be going there. So, I mean, they may not be very close friends, but they are people who we want to deal with. So this is the way to go. I mean, and we have a role, and you are right, that as a leader, we should educate our congregation. So, no, this is happening in the community, and we are part of it. We're proud to be part of it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And indeed, the opposite also occurs. If you've got a leader who's advocating violence and extremism, then the congregation is going to follow them.
And that make us responsible now, after this dialogue, to make sure that what we have actually discussed and learned from this seminar, to be able to share that to the rest of the community. And I think that's Toowoomba has. I have seen the work between probably the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church. I see the genuine relationship there as an outsider, not within the church itself, but I can see that feeling of goodwill, and it is infectious if you see them. It's not about what we talk about, but it's when you're there that you actually see that process is happening. And that's why we are being encouraged by all these different organizations and networks trying to move toward the same goal of making this community an example that people can learn from.
But I think that's already happening.
It is happening.
I don't think there's another example anywhere in Australia, not that I know of anyway, of how far what progress can be made, like the example of Toowoomba.
And it's slow work.
It is.
It is not did not happen
Doesn't happen
last year,
overnight.
2 years ago. It's been slowly building up, and we are seeing the good results now. And people from outside are appreciating it. Even us are surprised.
I'm interested
But I
in
have
that.
Yes,
maybe
yes.
if I could, just in relation to what you've just said, I wonder if I could ask Evan, thanks very much for your presentation. To what extent would you find that when the people of the different faiths you've mentioned who are in the various chaplaincies, when they're working together on various community projects at a socio-ethical level, to what degree does that open up a process of better understanding each other's religious foundations and roots and so on?
Yeah, well, it works simply on a practical level. Whatever, because you run into a program and if somebody comes across an ethical problem, they'll say, oh, hang on, that's against my ethics or against my morals. So then we can talk about it. We can discuss them. If there's no agreement, well, then we agree to disagree. And then we move on to the next one. But we don't leave that as a stopping point. It's a challenge. I always look at it as a challenge to come back later on and talk about it and work with it.
So acknowledgement of difference and acceptance of that would be part of the process.
Yeah,
Is that a fair way to put that?
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, Emily.
Talking about those documents that we signed on 2 different occasions, and also the dialogues that I've been caught up with in the ecumenism, I found that we've always made progress when we move from a dualistic dialogue to a paradoxical dialogue. So when the dialogues become a paradox, a both and, rather than an either or, there's always been growth. And rather than even having a consensus, the fact that they're happy enough to stand the fact that it's both and at this moment in time, and to try and come to that balance and so on. So that's been my experience in the sense of a creative dialogue in communities that have worked together, and the education programs and so on, moving from that dualistic to a paradoxical dialogue.
I think one of the things that also important in the community is personal relationship among the leaders. That sometimes can be very helpful and useful. If you have first-hand experience with people of other faith, and they care for your faith and yourself, and you can transmit that to the community, that's going to be quite helpful. And I have seen in my own experience, I had a problem with something in the community. I sought help from Brian or Mark, and they come forward and say, forward, help me to solve the problem. It has nothing to do with the religion. It's just a personal thing. If I tell the story to the community, they might think, these people are helpful, regardless of the faith. So the personal relationship, and takes time. It doesn't develop overnight. But if we work together, gradually we become friends and we become colleagues, and we can discuss even things that were very sensitive to us before. I just asked even a question which I would not ask him if I don't know him for years. It's a sensitive question. But he didn't respond my email. He came straight to my office and said, Shahjahan, I thought this is the issue that you raised. We should talk face to face. And we discussed.
And that means that you have already built that trust.
Exactly.
That's very important
Exactly.
thing, trust in that relationship. Yeah. Do you have any other questions for our presenters today? Any comments?
I have
Yes, yes, Annie.
talking about Toowoomba,
Yeah.
which I wasn't familiar with until yesterday, and it's very interesting. About how you can talk to other groups or other networks about what you're doing, and also likewise hearing from other networks about other things that are happening. Because I think my perception of it is, half of it is telling a story as well, that this work's important, and explaining why the interventions are important as well. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity and how you're familiar with other networks or other networks learn from you. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Would anyone care to answer that? Or?
Someone from Toowoomba?
I can only speak for myself. I think the point Alan's point about leadership, we're all in different positions. I mean, we're gathered from many places. For example, I'm from ACU, I'm working teacher education. I was just trying to say to my colleagues, I've got 7 units this year, but that means this semester, that means 7 groups of people, about 50 to 150 each. And I'm certainly going to be influenced by this example, whether it's stories or examples. The multiplying effect, I think, for all of us in our work. And that's without formal structures, that's just as one.
It's funny, I'm sort of involved with quite a number of, I think Pureland Centre has done a fantastic job of promoting peace and harmony within Toowoomba, and we really owe a lot to them for what they've done, the Venerable Master Chin Kung, for what he's done with bringing Toowoomba as a peace capital of the world. I also belong to a Christian Leaders Network, which is doing basically the same thing within the Christian churches. I belong to other groups that are doing the same thing. So we're working with the Council. So there is networks everywhere are doing this. A lot of groups I'm not involved in, but they're still working together to do that. They have the same aim, so which is really great.
And to support that, we have many drivers within the community who belong to multiple networks. Yeah. And these are the links, like there are sector-specific networks that work on certain issues, but we're all linked. There's a lot of partnership and collaboration within institutions, the USQ, the Toowoomba Council, the Pureland College, and the social justice. So we all link up together and discuss on shared issues. And we know what's going on in town. I mean, like, we are not isolated, that's what I'm saying. We are not working in silos here because the community is small, but at the same time, we have established those relationships. It takes a while to build them, but on a personal level, we can talk, and on a professional level, we can discuss about programs, projects, issues, initiatives, and we share. because we are working for the same community. So we are not competing against each other. We are just.
She seems to be asking about spreading it beyond Toowoomba, though. That's the impression I get when you're talking about that.
Is that what you're...
Yeah, which I think sort of been answered by the spread of partnership or networks. But yeah, I mean, I think Dandenong in Victoria has had an interfaith network group for about 25 years and has, you know, it's got a really solid group. And there are other communities, I think, that do it well, and then there are others that don't. And I think the story is about how you help others to do it better.
Roberto, I think there's two elements that are not getting the emphasis that they need. The first element is that a big thing going for the Toowoomba people is the fact that the mayor, leader, is such a passionate advocate. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that you seem to have the press on side. Now, maybe that's a view from afar in Brisbane, but to me it seems that most of the press that I hear in Toowoomba about things like this is positive. Now, if you've got a leader who's not positive or a press that's not positive, it's a hard road to make any progress.
Yes, I agree with you that that one is a good story that we will emphasize as far as the community is concerned.
But that's
Roberto, can I put a few words in here? I've been having a bad day because my bishop took half my talk. But I'm going to address some of this tomorrow about networking. And Bishop Morris hosted a gathering here in 1996 with heads of Anglican, Catholic, Lutheran and Uniting churches, which started off on a lot of interaction between those four churches. And they produced a document called Being Church in the Rural Queensland. Now, my understanding is that you mentioned Dandenong, I think Clare Valley is something very similar in South Australia. The Being Church in rural Queensland grew in 2009 when we had another gathering here in Toowoomba of the same churches from throughout Queensland, and they produced a document called Living Church in rural Queensland, which is really a way of and I'll have some of them tomorrow to hand out that document. Really a way of people interacting with each other. But just like early this year, Living Church in rural Queensland has actually become a commission for Queensland churches together. So there's a lot of that sort of work which is relevant over the first gathering since 1996. Which has fired a lot of us, to be involved to the depth we are and the height that we think. So the rest will come tomorrow.
That interconnectedness with regards to, say, what happened there flows over like it's like a pebble in a pool. It just takes time. And one of the great examples we have here or among many is the ecumenical chaplaincy group at our hospitals. Who have got, covered all faiths right across the board, and they've been courses together and so on, and they have this extraordinary gift to the hospital. And this particular chaplaincy group in Toowoomba is regarded by the Health Department in Queensland as the model of how to do ecumenical chaplaincy in the context, say, of a hospital.
Pastoral care.
Pastoral care
as well. We have been involved in that one too. And just a little note. In Toowoomba, we have African, because it's one of the settlement areas where lots of African communities have been settling, and they bring along the culture in terms of the religious inclinations. Actually, in the next couple of months there will be a conference of African pastors, national conference of African pastors here in Toowoomba. And we have not yet, broadcast that, but these are things that are happening. Toowoomba has become a focal point for people gathering in terms of, interreligious dialogue. So that is a big thing. It's national. All the African pastors are coming to Toowoomba to have a conference. I think they'll be involved in USU also. They're using the facilities of USU.
And there are a lot of, I think we all meet with different people. I meet with the Australian bishops a couple of times a year, and they might be getting sick of me now, but I usually drop things in their boxes about what's happening with the Aboriginal thing here or other activities, and it sometimes just gives some idea, oh, look, this is working in another place. And there's those contexts taking place, and hopefully some action's coming of that. I'm not saying, we're the best, but I am saying that to them. But, but on the other hand, it's sort of encouraging them to try and get some things going too.
Information change.
Yeah.
Right. Yes,
just perhaps comment on a question after Marcus' presentation. I really enjoy, obviously they're extremely critical and as someone expressed, harsh, which is credit for academic, excellent credit. But listen to your presentation, I just recall a very brief meeting with professor from Berlin University in East Germany in 70s. And as a young student, I asked, Professor, please explain to me, do you believe in possibility unification between East and West Germany? And he was very skeptical about it, and I said, look, this is the same nation, the same language, the same history. The borders, everything doesn't make sense. And he started to tell me, look, you are too young, you don't understand the politics. It's basically in reality, it's impossible. And listening to your presentation, your very critical presentation, can you speculate whether in your view it is possible unification or closer cooperation between Anglican, Catholic and the Lutheran Church, for example?
And the Lutheran churches?
Yes, because you mentioned also some samples of cooperation, current cooperation.
Which will probably make me sound very critical again. The Western world, census data is very clear, but institutional churches are decaying. There are more Muslims practicing their faith in the United Kingdom than there are Anglicans. Maybe there will be unity on some level as survival. I don't know. Numbers are declining. And I'm sorry, that sounds terribly depressing, but I'm backed up in every respect by every census that was taken. And I wonder if perhaps there will be a need for unity simply because the churches as they currently exist will not be able to support themselves economically. And that's a very pessimistic answer. I'm sorry about that. Maybe more positively, there will actually be deeper understanding. I mean, it's been a long time since there was, for instance, a no popery riot in Britain. Those attitudes have subsided, prejudices have actually disappeared. That's a great step towards cooperation, at least.
Good. Thank you. At least I've got more optimism. Thank you.
I think something good will come out of this awareness. Well, I think this is, we had a very good discussion, I think, with the last three panel presenters. And I know that there will be a lot more interesting topics and discussions to come out tomorrow. So I would just like to thank all the panelists and presenters.